extremely supportive. I do not think sentient beings should be treated as property. Instead of aiming to exploit other sentient beings more, inverted commas, humanely, I think our priority should be helping other sentient beings. This clearly would involve a revolution, given that unfortunately human civilization at the moment is based on exploitation, harming, killing other sentient beings. How should it be done? Probably the greatest source of severe, chronic and readily avoidable suffering in the world today is factory farming. So I think our priority should be shutting factory farms and slaughterhouses and making the transition to vegetarian and eventually a vegan lifestyle. I think it's now quite widely accepted that chimpanzees, for example, should not be vivisected, but we do have still this rather arbitrary conception of non-human animals. It is and isn't possible to exploit and harm and others in which it is in some sense acceptable. In the case of humans, one wouldn't say, one would hope that people who have lower IQs should be treated worse than people who have high IQs. I would take exactly the same approach with non-human animals, that what is ethically relevant is sentience, not capacity to perform sophisticated cognitive tasks. And that non-human animals, their cognitive capacities range from that of, in some cases, pre-linguistic toddler, let's say pigs, to perhaps 3-month-old human infants, let's say chickens. But one wouldn't say the fact that a human infant is cognitively unsophisticated is grounds for harming, abusing or killing that infant. Likewise, I think exactly the same is true of a chicken. That cognitive capacity is only relevant insofar as it suggests greater sentience, and the evidence that there is some kind of link between cognitive sophistication and intensity of experience is surprisingly thin. That the most intense forms of experience that you or I are capable of, they're not something like the capacity to generate novel, interesting sentences, generative syntax or mathematics. The most intense experiences involve our core emotions, pain, agony, fear, panic, orgasmic bliss. i.e. it is the most ancient, evolutionarily ancient experiences that are the most intense. And I think one must presume that this is the case with infants, pre-linguistic toddlers and non-human animals too. Now, the skeptic can always raise the point, how do you know that non-humans are conscious? And one cannot definitively rebut the skeptic about non-human animal consciousness any more than one can refute the skeptic who doubts that other humans are conscious. But a convergence of independent strands of evidence suggests that non-human animals are essentially identical to us in our core emotions, or rather certainly the higher vertebrates. If you look at that we factory farm and kill, you'll find the same almost identical genes, almost same neurotransmitter pathways, the same behavioural responses to noxious stimuli in a pre-linguistic toddler as you will in a pig. So yes, I think we need an ethical revolution in our treatment of other sentient beings. Yes, what kind of ethical framework does this presuppose? I personally am an ethical utilitarian, but one needn't be an ethical utilitarian to advocate phasing out involuntary suffering in non-human animals. There is, for instance, a very powerful indirect ethical utilitarian case for enshrining in law the non-property status of non-human animals. Now, it doesn't solve all the problems of the rest of the living world if we cease to treat sentient beings as property. who can be factory farmed and abused and killed, but nonetheless, by enshrining a prohibition in law against this, it does prevent an immense amount of suffering. So yes, there are powerful indirect ethical utilitarian reasons to actually take a rights-based approach. Of the different ethical traditions, virtue ethicists on the whole would not necessarily worry about the plight of non-human animals, or rather only to the extent that, let's say, humans abusing non-human animals would tend to lead to a deterioration in our character and yes, deterioration in our behaviour towards other human beings. Likewise, some Kantians would say that non-human animals, for example, they're not rational subjects of, not rational agents. But in general, I would say, whether you are a Christian, you're a Buddhist, regardless of your ethical persuasion, if you think that other things being equal, involuntary suffering is wrong, then you ought to phase out factory farming, eating meat, and in the long run support compassionate stewardship of nature. The actual ethical assumptions one needs to make are actually quite parsimonious. So what then is different from, let's say, a Buddhist ethic? After all, Buddha, many 2.5 millennia ago, said, "May all that have life be delivered from suffering." In one sense, nothing whatsoever. The only the radical difference now is that technology offers us the route to make a Buddhist compassionate conception of the living world a reality. Perhaps this is a little too consensus-based. There certainly are plenty of ethics that have valued struggle, suffering, survival, and glorified war. I mean, there's the kind of the Genghis Khan approach. There is the Nietzschean, "That which does not crush me makes me stronger." But it is possible, in principle at any rate, I think, to build a surprisingly wide consensus around what would otherwise sound an extraordinarily far-fetched vision, a kind of high-tech Jainism, if you like.